This is an AQA Psychology GCSE revision video for Paper 1 Memory with a specific focus on the first key study, which is Murdock's serial position curve. So to be confident with Murdock's study, you need to understand the role of the multi-store model and how the multi-store model suggests our memory works. So that is the image on screen, which is this idea that we have sensory memory or a sensory register, which takes information from our 5 senses. For example, right now, your sight and your sound of me describing the model. If you pay attention to this information, it will be transferred into your short-term memory, which is around 30 seconds long. And you can go through the process of rehearsal, which is sort of rehearsing, recapping, revisiting information, just repeating it over and over, and that will keep it in the short-term memory. And through enough rehearsal, that will be transferred to your long-term memory, where it can stay potentially for the rest of your life. And then anytime you are asked to recap your knowledge of the multi-store memory, you retrieve it into your short-term memory. So that is the multi-store model of memory, and that is one of the things that you need to know before you understand Murdock's study. But moving on to Murdock's serial position curve study and what it tells us about memory. A couple of things we need to understand. When describing a study in psychology, you need to include the aim of the study. What did they want to see? What did they want to find out or investigate? The procedure, the method, how did they go about finding out what they wanted to? The findings or the results, what did they find? So that might be in a percentage, or it might just be a general sort of sentence of what they found. And finally, the conclusion. What does the study show us? Does it support or not support any particular theory that you've linked your knowledge to? So for example, the Murdock serial position curve study, we might be able to conclude what it shows us about the multi-store model of memory by the end of this video. So Murdock is a key study on the specification, which means you could be asked a 9-mark question. It could be something like describe and evaluate Murdock's study, or they might say describe and evaluate Murdock's serial position curve study. So we're going to get stuck in to Murdock's study, starting with these list of 20 words on the left-hand side of your screen. They're going to disappear in 10 seconds. I'd like you to read the list out loud or rehearse it. Try and remember as many words as possible, and then I will take them off the screen and instruct you to write them down. So you have 10 seconds from now. So now that the words have disappeared, have a go at writing down as many as you can remember. Okay, so getting stuck into Murdock's study then. In 1962, Murdock carried out the serial position curve study. Murdock's aim was to see if there actually are different memory stores. So linking that to your knowledge of the multi-store model, is there actually a short-term memory and a long-term memory, for example? But he also wanted to see if the position of a word in a list is affected the probability of recalling it. So Murdock used 103 students. They were the people he used in his study, and they were tested in a lot of different sessions. So they were given 20 lists of words, and each list varied from 10 to 40 words. So in each session, the participants had to listen to those 20 word lists, which had 10 to 40 words on them. All of the words were different, so just like that list of words that you tried to recall previously in the video. And then participants were asked to recall the words to the experimenter. So that was the procedure. So the key details are the number of participants, which is 103, the fact that they had lots of different lists of words, or 20 if you want to be specific, and that the lists of words varied in length from 10 to 40. Moving on to Murdock's findings now. This is an opportunity for you to pause the video and to think about the 3 questions which I've put on the left-hand side, using the graph, using the findings just below, sort of this graph here. If you have a look, you've got the probability of recall, you've got the serial position, so the position the word was on the list, the start of the list on the left-hand side of the graph, and the end of the list on the right-hand side of the graph. So I'm going to give you the opportunity now to pause the video and answer the questions on the left, and in 5 seconds I will go through the answers and the results of Murdock's study. So what you can see here is Murdock's findings in a table, along with the key concepts that you need to be able to understand and describe for Murdock's findings. So we have the primacy and the recency effect. Now what they refer to is, if you have a look at the graph here, the probability of recall and the position of words on the list. The probability of recall was high for the first 5 words of the list, those in the position of the start of the list, and that is because of what's called the primacy effect. The first few words in a list are more likely to be recalled because they have become long-term memories. So when given that list of words, like you might have done on the previous slide, the words at the start of the list are the first ones you come across, so you might be repeating those over and over in your head, and that transfers them to long-term memory. And then if you have a look here, the words in the middle have a low probability of recall. Most participants forget those words. They are what's called displaced. And then finally, the last 5 words on the list have a very high probability of recall, and that is due to the recency effect. So the last few words, the ones that are heard most recently, are more likely to be recalled because they're in your short-term memory. So that idea that our short-term memory has a duration of about 30 seconds, these last few words would have been heard right at the end. And so what we have here is the serial position effect, which is the idea that the first and last words in a list are more likely to be recalled due to their position. So that is demonstrated by this graph here, where you can see the position of the word affects the probability of it being recalled. And then finally, as mentioned when we recapped the multi-store model at the start of the video, Murdock's study can be used as a piece of AO3 in which it supports the multi-store model because it shows that there are separate short-term and long-term memory stores. It shows that these words, the primacy effect, were recalled from the long-term memory, and the words at the end are recalled from the short-term memory. Due to the words in the middle being lost, these here that I'm circling in green, it suggests that there was no memory store for them to go to. So those are your findings and a suitable conclusion of Murdock's study, where you link it to the multi-store model and Murdock's own conclusion in terms of the serial position effect. In the final part of the video, we'll be looking at how you can evaluate Murdock's serial position curve study, considering the strengths and weaknesses. So to evaluate a study in psychology, the best way to do this is to attempt to grave it. G standing for generalizability, R standing for reliability, A for application, V for validity, and E for ethics. And you want to try to be able to argue your evaluations in the format point, evidence, explain or elaborate, but evidence, and conclusion or a consequence. So in this box here are some questions for you to consider and try to apply grave to Murdock's study, because I will be going through the answers in 5 seconds. Okay, so here we have our grave. This is just a support sheet for you to think specifically about the elements of grave if you are studying in applying it to Murdock's study. So if you have already got your evaluation points written down, I would skip through to the video towards the end and have a look at the explained evaluation points. Otherwise, you can listen to me explain these 4 evaluation points now. So Murdock used 103 psychology students in his study. So when we're thinking about the generalizability, do you think that those psychology students are going to behave in a similar way to the rest of the population, say geography students or pensioners or middle-aged people? Would they behave the same, and would Murdock have found the same results if he used those people? Why or why not? Try to explain your point. Moving on to reliability, Murdock used a standardised procedure. Now, this is a key term covered in the research methods part of the course, which basically just means that all of the participants had the exact same instructions and everything was the same for every single participant. When he read the words out from the list, he made sure that they were read out at the same pace, so say 1 word per second, so that there weren't any irregularities. Now, in terms of reliability, do you think that other people would have been able to replicate this study? And do you think that if they did replicate the study, they'd get similar findings? Then for validity, this was a lab experiment, and you might be asked to evaluate lab experiments in psychology. So have a think about the fact that they're not in their natural environment. If they're students, they weren't in a school classroom or at home, for example. They were in a controlled environment. So do you think they would have performed better or worse if they were in a natural environment, such as their homes or their classrooms? And then finally, E for ethics. It was a repeated measures design, which meant that participants took part in lots of conditions. So when we went through the procedure, I explained that they had 20 lists of words. Some lists were as short as 10, some were as long as 40. And so they had to learn a lot of word lists. Do you think that participants would have been bored in this experiment, and what impact might this have had? So if you need to, jot your answers down. In 5 seconds, we'll look at the completed evaluation points. Okay, so here we go. Psychology students is definitely going to be a weakness, because you cannot say that those students would behave the same as other people and other countries. So the results are not generalisable. Murdock using a standardised procedure is good because it means other researchers can replicate his study. And if they get similar results, then you would assume his conclusion is valid because his theory has more and more support. So it would make sense, it would be more valid, more truthful. Taking place in a lab setting is bad because participants might have changed their behaviour, and we call this demand characteristics, when people change their behaviour because they know they're being studied. So they might have paid more or even less attention to the words because they knew their score would be recorded. And then lastly, participants might have got bored memorising all of the words that they had to, and so their results might not be similar to everyday life, and it might have also caused them a little bit of psychological harm in terms of stress and having to remember all of those words. But remember, I said you only need 2 strong evaluation points for a key study question, and so I would recommend the strongest ones would be the lack of generalizability, the fact that it is conducted in a controlled environment and demand characteristics are likely, and then if you're confident, the fact that Murdock did use a standardized procedure, because that will help you compare Murdock's study to the other key study in memory, which is Bartlett's War of the Ghost study. So that is the end of the video on Murdock's serial position curve study. Thank you for watching. I hope you found it useful.